Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this German Africa Foundation event entitled 10th Anniversary of South Sudan's Independence, Broken Promises, Current Challenges, and the Way Ahead. My name is David Schwarke. I'm the Secretary General of the German Africa Foundation. I would like to welcome in particular German members of Parliament, Anita Schäfer, Christoph Matschi, and Volkmar Klein, who have signed up for this event. We're honored to have you. Let me also welcome all members of the German Africa Foundation, including our president, Dr. Uschi Eitz. Ladies and gentlemen, from the list of participants that I saw earlier, I take it that many of you have followed South Sudan's history for a very long time, and many of you will remember when 10 years ago, South Sudan became independent. Let me briefly read a few lines from then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's speech that he gave in Juba on Independence Day. He said, "We gather in celebration, but we are mindful of the enormous challenges ahead: deep poverty, lack of basic infrastructure and institutions of government, political insecurity. And yet at the same time, we must not underestimate South Sudan's remarkable potential. Its resilient and talented people, abundant natural resources, huge areas of arable land, and the Great Nile running through it. With these assets, South Sudan could grow into a prosperous, productive nation capable of meeting the needs of its people." And later on, he said, "South Sudan's success will be measured by how well it serves its citizens." I think it's fair to say today that South Sudan, for the time being so far, has not been able to serve the needs of its people. And we want to take the opportunity of the 10th anniversary of South Sudan's independence to discuss with you today the reasons why the country has not been able to serve its people. We want to have a look at the political situation as it presents itself today. And we want to discuss the way ahead, including the question of whether or not the political structures, the political institutions in South Sudan need to be reshaped in order to better serve its people. I'm delighted and honored to welcome a terrific panel, and I see that Susan Page has been able to also join. Welcome, Susan Page. Let's start with you, the former US Ambassador. Thank you for being here. Great pleasure to have you. We have Irene Panozzo, who is with the EUSR. And then in Juba, she just arrived in Juba, where you learned. And then we have Professor Rout, Biel, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Strategy and Policy Studies, and Father James Oyet, the Secretary General of South Sudan's Council of Churches. Let me welcome you all on behalf of the German Africa Foundation. You will be introduced in more detail by my colleague, Ingo Henneberg. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being prepared to answer to the many questions I think that we have. We will bring in the audience later, but first I hand over to Ingo Henneberg for his first round of questions. Thank you and welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome from my side. I'm Ingo Henneberg. I'm a scientific advisor at the German Africa Foundation, and I did some work on South Sudan myself, primarily on constitution and political systems, so I'm especially curious to hear your insights. Before we start to technical issues, first, the panel will not be translated into German this time. And second, we will record the discussion, so it's a public format. I would like to do 2 rounds of questions with the panel, and then we have many experts in the audience, so I will open up the floor after about an hour. As Mr. Schwarke said, I just want to start briefly with a short introduction of our distinguished panel. So let me start with Ambassador Susan Page. She is a Harvard-trained lawyer, and she began her outstanding foreign affairs career at the US State Department at 91. And from 2011 until 2014, she served as the first US ambassador to South Sudan. And I will talk about her previous stations a little bit later on. Later, she served as acting permanent representative to the African Union and the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and at the US mission to the African Union, and she became special representative at the UN Secretary General to Haiti. And since last year, Ambassador Page is a professor of the practice of international diplomacy at the University of Michigan. So welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Next is Father James Oyet Latancio. He's a Catholic priest and he's the General Secretary of the South Sudan Council of Churches since 2015. And he works extensively and engages in initiatives to enhance peace building, healing, and reconciliation in South Sudan. And he holds a PhD in philosophy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingo.
Next is Professor Melha Biel. He's the acting executive director of the Juba-based think tank Center for Strategy and Policy Studies, and professor of political science at the Dr. John Garang Memorial University of Science and Technology. And he was professor at the Center for Peace and Development Studies, and he taught and researched on several issues: community studies, rural development, but also diplomacy and peace and conflict studies. And Professor Biel holds a PhD and a master degree in political science from University of Jena, right here in Germany. Welcome, Professor. And I will follow with Irene Panozzo. She is the political advisor to the EU Special Representative for the Horn of Africa since 2012. And she is currently based in Nairobi after stations in Juba and Addis Ababa, but at the moment she is in Juba, actually. She studied international and diplomatic studies, and she holds a PhD in political science. And we hope that our last but not least, our last participant, Edmund Yakani, will join us. Edmund Yakani is the Executive Director of the Community Empowerment for Progress organization. And he holds a degree in political science and law from the University of Juba and a diploma on gender and paralegal aid from the Khartoum Academy. So let's go right in. Ambassador Page, I would like to start with you. As we discussed the state of affairs in South Sudan after 10 years of independence, it is worth to reflect a bit on the context of the founding of South Sudan. After 22 years of civil war between the northern and the southern part of Sudan, between 2002 and 2004, 8 protocols were negotiated between the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, SPLM, and the government of Sudan. These protocols became the then famous Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or CPA, which was signed in 2005. So, Ambassador Page, before being the first ambassador to South Sudan, you served as a legal and political advisor to the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, and later to the United Nations Sudan. In this capacity, you were involved in both negotiating and drafting parts of the CPA agreement. So, with this in mind, which were the key aspects of the CPA peace process that influenced the political landscape of the new state, South Sudan? And where are the aspects the aspects that foreshadowed later problems? In other words, what went wrong?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, to the German Foreign Ministry for hosting us and the foundation. But, you know, the times were very different. And I think it's important to note what led to the relative success of the negotiations that led to the CPA. we have to remember that the negotiations began, well, they had begun under IGAD a long time earlier, but this rejuvenated peace process started after 9/11, 2001. And at that time, Sudan was very eager to get off of the state sponsors of terrorism list. The US had just been struck by the bombings in New York, and the Pentagon and the other planes. So it was a moment of opportunity, and these sorts of moments don't come along very often. So I would say that that was a big motivating factor, was that at that moment, I would say the government of Sudan was more ready to negotiate than they had been previously. So that was a very positive factor. The second thing was that although we tried very hard to, as the mediation team, to have the process opened up beyond just the sort of two main parties, the National Congress Party represented by the government and the SPLM, but the government really would not go there. It was, so we had to be creative with allowing other people to come into the negotiations, have their voices heard, and said what they wanted to be included in the peace agreement. So that was a challenge, just to make it much more applicable to all of the people of South Sudan, and not just the warring parties and even the SPLM or the SPLA as the army. They were not the only fighters at the time. So that was a challenge. But again, the context was very different, and you had more or less a very united region, where I think everyone at least recognized that wrongs had been done to the people of Southern Sudan, and it was time to do something about it. Now, the priority of the CPA was the unity of Sudan. And so I know one of the criticisms is often that the mediators or the parties didn't do enough to focus on what the new state would look like. But if you're negotiating the end to a civil war, you can't also be simultaneously negotiating a new state with a priority on unity, because no country is going to go straight into negotiation, the separation of its country. So the peace agreement provided for the referendum in 6.5 years, so the 6.5-year interim period. And I would say that the biggest mistakes were perhaps related to not full awareness of what was in the peace agreement and how substantially things changed after Dr. John Garang was killed in August of 2005. Just months after the peace agreement was signed in January 9th. One of the criticisms is that not enough people knew, outside of Dr. John Garang and outside of then Vice President Taha, what the specifics, not what was on paper, but how they had come to negotiate certain concerns and certain issues, and what the personal trade-offs were. That was a benefit during the peace process, because they had developed a relationship and could discuss the specifics, what I need to go forward with this clause, what you need to go forward with that clause. But after John Garang's death, people didn't know Salva Kiir as well, and Salva Kiir had made it very clear that he was in favor of secession, and that's how he began ruling, really. So it created a major challenge right off the bat. And then the last thing I will say is that Darfur was also raging at the time. And so the attention of the people who should have been helping with the implementation of the peace agreement, obviously it's the parties' agreement, but it would have been better if there had been a lot more oversight and follow-up at the time, but everyone was distracted by what was going on in Darfur. It's not to make an excuse, but oftentimes an agreement is signed, we all applaud, success, great, and we move on to the next crisis. And in large measure, that's really what happened. And the implementation was left to falter. And I would say not enough follow-up by those who perhaps could have made a difference at that time to kind of keep things on track. I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you. So your main point is that basically the implementation phase of the agreement was the problem then with the death of John Garang. And
well, the implementation was not only a problem because of his death, but there was, at least people assumed that there was an actual strategy in place. And even the names of who was supposed to be in that first cabinet allegedly died with him in his briefcase. And so, I mean, you know, we never know all of these details. We don't know exactly who he was talking to and with whom he had, you know, negotiated different things. But the first cabinet of the government of Southern Sudan and the government of in the north, in Khartoum, really had a very heavy northern-centric bias, and it's unclear if that was actually the idea of John Garang. And then the other aspect is that the Assessment and Evaluation Commission, which had been set up to try to follow the implementation, the way that it was established was different from the way that we had anticipated during the peace process. And so it actually gave the control of the AEC to the parties and not to the chairperson of the Assessment and Evaluation Commission. And that was a big mistake because then you really couldn't move anywhere. The negotiating power was very different. And so lots of blame to go around, but the parties were not all that committed to the CPA. They just, on the Southern side, really wanted to get to the referendum. And on the Northern side, they wanted to, you know, make sure that they had as much power as possible. So it didn't make for very comfortable partners.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Biel, as a well-known scholar, you can provide us some sort of an overview. In 2011, people cheered in the streets of Juba, like Mr. Schwager said. And then in 2 years' time, after this relatively stable situation, the internal struggle erupted. So the same question goes for you. What went wrong since 2011? We can hear you, Professor Biel. Your mic is muted.
Okay, is it okay now?
It's perfectly fine now.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the African Foundation and the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs for inviting me to this important discussion. I would like to say hi to Ambassador Page, whom I actually last met in 2012 when he left Juba. I'm glad to see you again on this discussion. Yes, what went wrong? I think Ambassador Pei has mentioned something. Actually, you know, SPLM, with the ruling party, has actually, after we got independent, everyone was happy, you know that, with the support from international community. And after that, actually, South Sudan especially the SPLM has lost the vision. They did not work for the unity of the people. They did not put in place Plan B for the future of this country. And if you follow, if John Garang would have been alive, I remember I come across some of the work for the future of South Sudan, which was actually put in place. Definitely would have a good country now, and even this kind of conflict would have been avoided if Garang would have been alive. You know, you have seen South Sudan. You look at the budget of South Sudan 2012-2013 was a very huge budget, where we would have actually utilized to work on infrastructure development, schools, hospitals, and even to diversify the economy of the country. All this we are not done. And definitely, majority of you were disappointed because this is not what they expected. And if you see what is happening every now and then, even now we say we have signed the peace 2018, but every day you find a lot of internal conflict among different communities because our leader did not work to unite the people. He did not work for the state and nation building, you see. So actually, what went wrong is because we have lost the vision. We have actually thought that the country will work for the people, but it is actually the leaders that's supposed actually to, you know, to work for the future of this country, to unite the people. You remember when we were in the bush, there was also from time to time a conflict within the different groups, which you remember 1991, the SPLA is split because also of what to do in the future for United South Sudan, for United Sudan, or for an independent South Sudan. All this after we got independent, actually the SPLA as ruling party would have actually to reconcile the different group, you know, to unite them and give them a vision, you know, support them, give them a direction, you know, but all this we are not done. That is one of the reasons why actually you see today we have a crisis after crisis, peace sign were signed, but were broken because there is a mistrust among the political elites who are actually ruling, and you remember majority of South Sudanese are not educated, so it is easy for any political group to mobilize its community, you know, against the other community because majority of people cannot actually read and write. So it is unfortunately that such kind of situation could happen just less than 2 years after independence. You remember how far we fought for this country, and even we are disappointed also our friends who have actually fight side by side with South Sudan. If you see what is happening today, actually those who are enemies of South Sudan are now the friend, and those who are friends of South Sudan are now the enemies of South Sudan. This has something to do with our leaders, whether they are in the government or they are in opposition. All of them actually sharing the responsibility for what is happening in this country. It's unfortunate.
Thank you. Professor Biel, already in your dissertation, you worked on political elites and the formation of the transitional government for Southern Sudan in 2005. So how much did the identities of the then SPLM leadership shape the formation of the new state? Could only a joint enemy in form of the then Khartoum government cover internal rivalries? And when this external rivalry ended, then it erupted in an internal struggle?
Well, that is true. As I already indicated earlier, that there was also internal conflict within the liberation movement. We led to the split at that time. Definitely, of course, the objective was to fight the common enemies and get independent. But of course, after independence, it would have been actually the work of the elites within our movement, the SPLM, actually to work for reconciliation. And of course, also in generally, if you have seen also most of the elite who are running the country, Today, most of them, you see their background, they are either former military commanders in the country. Some of them did not have actually the necessary experience to run a nation. You know, some of them have never worked in the offices. So definitely, it was not easy. It is not also easy for somebody who do not have experience to run a country. And so actually, the elites that we have, of course, we had the, you know, the what people refer as a power struggle. Each one of them want to get cake, want to get appointed, want to get a position, and it has become actually a problem. If I give one example, currently in South Sudan, also we have the 10 states. You find that if you come from a certain region, you will not be able to get a job. For example, a political position in other regions, because we have misunderstood. If you are coming on a ticket of the SPLM, definitely you can become a governor anywhere in South Sudan, provided that you are South Sudanese. But this is not currently not the case, because people misunderstood. You know, regions are not meant for track, but they are meant actually for administrative arrangement. And you can come from Equatoria and be a governor of Unity State. There's nothing can prevent you from that. First of all, you are a South Sudanese. Secondly, you are coming from a political party, and you are supposed to sell the vision of the party, you know, so that the party actually win the confidence of the citizen, you know. But this is not the case now in South Sudan. So we are people misunderstood it. And I remember in 1983 we have something like called Kokora. It looked like what we have now. In some cases, it looked like a coconut, because people, you know, people just actually look at the person where he was born, but not looking where you belong for them politically, you know. So definitely, our elite again misunderstood what to do, how to run this country, and it is a big challenge. If I give you an example, in when Garang became the first vice president, I think he appointed governors of the 10 states in South Sudan, where he mixed up, he nationalized the nation. You know, he appointed Equatoria to be a governor in the Nuer dominated state. He appointed the Denka in Equatoria dominated state, and so on. You know, what was actually to nationalize, to have the unity of the people. You know, we should not look at the tribe. We should not look at where someone was born, but we should look at what this person will do for the nation, what he will do for the citizen of this country. And this is what the citizen expected, because if service is delivered to them, they will not care whether you are a Denka, you are a Nuer, or you are a Shuluk, or whatever you are, you know. But they will appreciate. They will appreciate the government. They will appreciate the party that is actually appointed somebody like that. And this is where we went wrong as the elite, including myself also. It's not only those, I'm not talking about people outside. This is what we went wrong as South Sudanese, and there's a need actually to revitalize, you know, the way of how we do things in this country. We want to have a peaceful, united, and prosperous South Sudan, which our people, our citizens expected, but also our friend that fought with us for the last 50 years expected us to have a prosperous country, a country where we have a less poverty, we're eradicating poverty, because you know South Sudan is a rich country, but we are not managing the resources the way they are supposed to be. And I hope that we as the elite, we have to learn from this and actually open a new phase so that our people can enjoy peace rather than continue fighting, continue destroying our country, destroying our relationship. It doesn't bring anything. Now we have went back. When we were in 2013, we were better off. Now we went back almost 20 years. And as you know that our economy is already strong. It will take us many years to rebuild South Sudan to where we actually left it before, 2012, 2013 and 2012. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Father James, the Catholic Church traditionally plays an important role in the South Sudanese society as a neutral organization outside of the rivalries and power struggle. And you are personally engaged, as I said, in several projects for peace building. How divided is South Sudan in 2021? And is there a difference between the situation in the capital or in the rural areas, or between different states, for instance?
Thank you. Thank you, friends from Germany and the German Foreign Ministry for this opportunity. Well, how divided is South Sudan? South Sudan, it makes me lose my hope. Things are, South is too much divided in ethnic lines, tribal lines, community lines. If you go to even that Jeng community, you get them divided inside there. If you go to the Bari community, you get them divided inside. So South Sudan, what they call Republic of South Sudan, on the present context, 2021 now, is just a very divided community. And the leadership have failed its people. After 10 years, we have lost direction. We have lost nationhood. We have lost that chance where the international community accompanied South Sudan to its independence 10 years ago. And today, even in language-wise, they don't know if there are South Sudanese who can't express themselves even in English. If you go to Arabic, you get South Sudanese who can't express them in Arabic. We are confused, no? We are neither for English nor for Arabic. We are confused. We are messed up. And see the government leadership. You get one who, you need to translate what he says. He speaks in Jeng, he speaks in Nuer, he speaks in Bari. If you speak to him in English, he can't understand you. You have to translate to him. This is where we have gone. South Sudan is very much divided. 10 years up down the line, no services, no, nothing is for the people. And the Juba town and the rural areas, what you see in Juba town, you see the V8s and the V6, these complex vehicles with lights, strange lights, and then you go to the rural areas, you don't get anything. You get only a poor woman, a poor child there, waiting for manna from heaven, waiting for that humanitarian friend who risked his or her life, that humanitarian friend from somewhere, from Germany, United States, Italy, from all over, coming to give that hope. He gets for that. But when it comes to our people, the leadership, as my brother said, the leadership failed its people. I've been to Malakal of recent, 10 days ago, I've been to Capoeira and Torit. In consultation with the leadership, what in Eastern Equatoria, the question was, what is that Eastern Equatoria they want in the present context before in the 10th anniversary of this celebration? Even the leadership couldn't answer this. They talk of political post, they talk of being appointed ministers, being appointed what, and so forth. In the end, they're only for post political wrangling. I want to be a commissioner, I want to be a minister, I want to be a governor. And if you drive along the road from Torit to Capoeira, it's insecure, but I drove. We went to our friends of the United Nations. We drove up to Capoeira, in spite of all the challenges of insecurity, just to test the ground. 10 years down the line, we are thinking as communities, as tribes, as ethnicity, not as a nation, not as a country. You hear a group of political people going to meet the president 2 days ago. They went as, they are political leaders. They went as Bari community. Bari community. And before that, another group went, they went as Jeng community. Not the whole Jeng, global Jeng. The Jeng from that corner of the country. You know, this is where we are. We are very divided, my brothers. I'm sorry to say it, but it's the reality in which we live, which has caused even the insecurity. We have got a lot of bodyguards, but we trust that God somewhere there, and your prayers globally, because I represent the ecumenical being of the country. Not the Catholic Church only, but the ecumenical churches. Our head office in Geneva, we have ecumenical friends in the United States, ecumenical friends in Germany, in Europe, and in Africa, ecumenical friends. They are praying for us. They are praying that peace, that sustainable peace, that nationalism of South Sudan being South Sudan, not the South Sudan divided on ethnic lines, on tribal lines, on community. Today, as we talk, many things went wrong. Maybe, as they said, the death of John Gereng, he died, as Ambassador Page said, he died with all these things in his briefcase. And that's why we were just at the fall apart. And as it was said, even President Kiir, at first, he said he's for the independence of South Sudan. But when it came to the time to campaign for the independence, he was timid a bit. He was timid in the sense that he was in the system. He was the vice president in Khartoum and the president of South Sudan. So he could not campaign publicly, officially, for the independence or separation of South Sudan. It was the church, the council, in its open letter in London, when it met with the Global Ecumenical Friends, Global Church Fellowship, they made a statement, what they call, let the people choose. That was the key for what we have today as South Sudan. Although the South Sudan we have is ethnic South Sudan, community South Sudan, tribal South Sudan. But there's hope. As a priest, as a churchman, I don't lose hope. There's still a good morning to come. We are investing in the young. Those who have fought for this country have let us down. Professor knows it very well. But we are hopeful. We need to change through the young generation for that positive South Sudan. Because if you speak with the South Sudanese today in the streets of Juba, they say, what hope do you have? He said, leave us alone. Let me look for some food for my family. They are hopeless. They are even violent. The soldiers themselves without salaries, the police themselves without salaries, the prison officers without salaries, the national security without salaries. They are desperate. You ask them, they get hot with you. They need support from you. And we have all these oils, we have all this money. Where is it? What went wrong? Where is this money? Who is accounting for these riches of South Sudan? It has become a curse. In my faith way of saying, these riches, these oils, these minerals is a curse. It's not a blessing. And everybody goes, they want white collar jobs. And a youth wants to be employed in the NGOs, with the embassies, with the governments, and sit there. Instead of going to be self-employed. 10 years down the line, you hear the youth, they started first in Baban, they found the UN offices in Reng, in Malakal, in Bentiu, in even Rumbek, and now as I speak in Torit, they gave 72 hours to the UN and non-government organizations to quit within 72 hours. They said to quit Eastern Equatoria, or to quit the county of Torit, the county of Ikoto, and the county of Lafon or Lopa. And then other tribes, they misinterpret the labor law of the country. Where is this South Sudan going 10 years down the line? It gives sense of hopelessness, but I want to be hopeful that there's a good morning. Ingo?
Thank you, Father James. Irene, now change the topic slightly, coming back a little bit more on the national level. As a political advisor to the UN Special Representative, you were deeply involved in the mediation process which led to the current, I was sure that I struggled with that one, to the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict of South Sudan. Yeah, so this agreement led to the official end of the civil war, and I'm interested because a lot of the agreements before didn't last that long. So what was the key element that the conflict parties could reach an agreement after 7 years of fighting? when the other accords have failed?
Thank you, Ingo, and thank you very much to the German Africa Foundation for organizing this panel in such a moment. Getting closer to the 10th anniversary and being in Juba again, it gives me a strange feeling. Not that I stopped coming, but I was here 10 years ago when the country was born, not in the current position. So being back for such an anniversary is a strange feeling. Indeed, I've been part of all the peace process since 2014, actually. So also the one before the revitalized, the high-level revitalization forum that brought to the current peace agreement. And I think it's important to understand what has been the difference in 2018, to remember also, refer at least briefly to the 2015 peace agreement. We have to keep in mind, I think, that both peace agreements and peace processes were again IGAD-led, as it was with the CPA, though probably already back then in a region slightly different from the one that Ambassador Page was referring to for the years of the CPA. There was the first peace process, which was led by the now unfortunately late Seyum Mesfin, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, was, I think, a good agreement, but clearly one party in particular, the party of President Salva Kiir, didn't like some of the provisions, didn't like the reforms chapters. So basically, every chapter from 3 to the end, from 3 to 8-9, which is the more reformative part of the peace agreement, but also didn't like some of the provisions in chapter 1 and 2, which are respectively the chapter on power sharing and on the security arrangements. So you may remember, at least for those who were around at the time, that when the peace agreement was signed in 2015, first of all, President Salva refused to sign, whereas the other parties did sign in Addis Ababa. 10 days later, there was a ceremony here in Juba, and the government side tried to put forward some reservations and have those reservations signed and countersigned, so basically endorsed by the IGAD heads of state, which they failed to achieve. And so the president signed, but clearly it was very evident and very open and very public that the political will to actually implement that peace agreement was not there. And when I say very public, because literally the list of reservations were read out during the signing ceremony. So, you know, it's impossible to be more public than that in saying, yes, I'm signing because basically I have no choice, but I don't agree with what I'm signing. Even if these reservations were not endorsed by the heads of state, and so did not become part formally of the peace agreement. We know how that implementation went or didn't go. So fast forward to 2017, late 2017, IGAD decided to revitalize the process and revitalize the peace agreement. And already the word revitalization and revitalize give a sense of how much these two peace agreements are linked to each other. So this is not a brand new peace agreement. This is a revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict for South Sudan, which was the name of the first peace agreement. So the main difference are basically some provisions in chapter 1 and chapter 2. The rest of the agreement has not been touched. The HLRF, the high-level revitalization forum that took place in Addis in early 2018 and then concluded in Khartoum during the summer of 2018, did not have really a mandate to reopen the chapters from 3 to the end of the peace agreement. Only had a mandate to reconsider and revisit and revitalize exactly chapter 1 and chapter 2. And if you compare these two chapters in 2018 with the 2 chapters of 2015, you will see that the difference is basically a different ratio in power sharing in favor of the incumbent government. So the percentage of the power sharing changed across the board. So not just in the executive, but also in the parliament, in the legislature, in the state executives and legislatures, and so on, giving 55% to the incumbent government and the rest being divided among the different other parties. As far as, and obviously there are other differences, but just to sum it up, this is the main one in the power sharing. And the other main one, is that on top of a president and first vice president and one single vice president, as it was in the case in 2015, the new peace agreement created 3 other positions for vice presidents. So now we have 1 president, 1 first vice president, and 4 normal, so to say, vice presidents, so that every party could have a vice presidential position. Going to the security arrangements chapter, chapter 2, the main change was the avoidance, which was a conditio sine qua non for the incumbent government, the avoidance of troops, IO opposition troops, but specifically SPLM-IO troops, even if SPLM-IO at that point was not the only armed movement fighting against the government, against Juba, but specifically, so opposition forces not coming back to Juba to accompany their respective principles, has it been the case in 2015. A unified army before the transition starts in the pre-transitional period, so that when finally the transition starts and the principles of the opposition parties come back to take up their positions, first and foremost, obviously, Dr. Riek Machar, but not only him, they come and are defended and protected by a unified army, unified national army, which already includes part of their men, but not by their own people as it was in 2015. The other element, I think, that was different was that the last part of the peace process took place in Khartoum, and it was the summer 2018. And there was a huge pressure from President Bashir, but also from President Museveni. So the parties were flown to Entebbe a couple of times so that the 2 principals, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, could be put under a collective pressure by both President Bashir and President Museveni, with the absence in this case of, not the total absence, but at least the lesser relevance this time of Ethiopia and Kenya. Ethiopia had already had the change of power. So the Prime Minister Abiy had come to power in April the same year, and he had made clear that he wanted to focus on something else. So he didn't seem to, he tried to bring Salva Kiir and Machar together to let them hug in Addis in June 2018. When he realized that was not enough, he had the merit to bring Riek Machar personally back into the process, because Riek Machar was still isolated in South Africa. But at that point, he basically gave up and handed over the process to Bashir and Museveni. And Bashir, with hindsight, we can say, I think it wasn't so clear at the time, but clearly Bashir was already probably difficult waters within his own domestically. So he needed also to have not only a success, but probably also some bilateral deals with Juba on the side to make sure that his own regime could survive. And that lasted for a while, but then we know how it went. 60 months later, the revolution started. And I'll stop here for further discussion.
Thank you, Irene. Let me start with the second round, but a short round with short questions, and I would ask you to keep your answers also a little bit shorter, that we have enough time for questions from the audience. Focusing now a little bit more on the civilian population and what's going on for like in the rural areas. Professor Biel, short question: what needs to be done in order to provide basic services for the population? You're still muted.
Thank you, Ingo. I think what needs to be done now, since we have a peace, you know, it is necessary for the government to stabilize the economy, because currently, if you go around in Juba, you know that South Sudan, all the food we have, the fuel are being imported from outside the country, from Uganda or Kenya. So they are very expensive. Majority of population cannot afford the food. So because the food also being imported in dollar, and if you go around Konya market here in Juba, a lot of family cannot afford it, because even the salary, the few who are working in public institutions, they don't get their salary in time. Even if they get the salary in time, for example, just a police officer is getting 1,200 SSP, and you know our currency has lost weight. It is very, very low. He cannot even afford to buy now, you know, water, you know. And so it is very important for the government to stabilize the economy, but also provide security for the population, because, you know, a lot of our people are staying in POC. And so security is very important, because if the security is there, our people can go to the countryside and cultivate and feed themselves. They can go to river and fetch for fish. But this is not there, so it's very important. Other things, like as I already mentioned, government has to invest in agriculture, so that we eat the food we produce in South Sudan. South Sudan is rich. It doesn't need to go and import food from Uganda and Kenya. We have more food here. So investment in agriculture is necessary, so that people get cheaper food, you know. Also, we have the issue of provision of clean water. You know, the water we drink in Juba is been brought to us from River Nile, not clean water. So this is very important. You know that clean water is the first medicine. If you drink clean water, you eat good food, you are healthy, you know, and you can walk. So this is very important. Also, the government has to continue. I know that these days they are very serious. Public servants are getting their salary, not in time, but unless now the time is shorter. You remember a year ago, they get their salary after 6 months, but now I think every two months now they're getting salary. It's a good step they have taken. And of course, I also mentioned a lot of people can cultivate in the countryside, but they cannot bring their food to Juba. So there's a need to invest on roads. I know the government has taken a step building roads like the one of going to Bor, Juba, Bor, Arumbek. This is a good step, but it's still there need work to be done. We have to also invest on the schools. You know, majority of our children are going to school in Uganda, Kenya, because we have neglected schools. You know, now majority of us do not stay with their children. So it is very bad, you know. So school is very important. We have to also invest on hospital, so that majority of people now in South Sudan, they die simply for a disease that can be cured. But because we don't have a good hospital, people dying, you know, that is very important for us for the government to do this. And lastly, which is very important, actually, the government and national unity, for them to deliver those services, they have to work together as a team, not to see themselves as somebody representing this party or represent this party. This cannot work. They have to see themselves as a colleague with a common objective to deliver service as required in the Constitution of South Sudan, as required in the peace agreement. You got me. So I think if some of these are done, definitely our people will get a little bit service, and we see that there is a fruit for peace. You know, because if there is no service, definitely nobody will be happy. I think Father James mentioned before, everywhere people are asking NGOs, they are causing a lot of fire among themselves. Now the issue is not between Denka and Nuer or Equatorial and Nuer. No, every clan is fighting within themselves. The Nuer are fighting among themselves. The Denka do the same, and the few Equatorial are the same. Simply because there's no service, there's no future, you know, for them. You know, somebody who's angry, he will not wait for this. He will definitely use force to survive. And this is what happened now. People have not actually understood that there's a peace, because peace is not just because there's no gun fighting among the group, but peace is that service. You know, people have to get service. People have to move freely, you know, day and night. Even in Juba now, by 10 o'clock, it's difficult for you to move, even if you have a gun, you know, because there are a lot of criminals which are actually, you know, they want to fight for food and all this kind of thing. They can even attack somebody, not necessarily because you have a problem with them. So our government, I feel to the government, national unit, to ensure that really they take the issue of service delivery seriously. This is the only way we can have peace in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Father James, can you briefly give us a little positive story or something that make you more certain that the healing process will go in a more positive way, so that at least the return of larger violence can be stopped?
Yes, thank you. In spite of all the challenges, in spite of all down the line, 10 years down the line with all these challenges, I want to recognize that in all these ups and downs, there are some positive situations in the country. Today, as I speak, women have got a voice now. Women, in spite of being abused, they have come out of that trauma to speak out their rights. We go to all the corners of South Sudan, they come together as women, not women of this tribe or what, they come as women of, not of faith, women of South Sudan, to speak, to address the issues, to address where they can, because they're like the breadwinners. So women have turned from being the receiving bit only. Today, down the line, 10 years, they are on the offensive, they are moving forward, they are talking. Wherever I go, even in our political dialogue in Eastern Equatoria, in Malakal, women are the main speakers. Men are there with their heads down. So it's positive. I see the sign of hope. In the sense of reconciliation, women have come out even to forgive those who have abused them. So there is a positive sign. And the perpetrators have come to realize that they need to pay the cost of what they have done. So down the line, 10 years before, we were afraid. But now, in spite of these challenges, we see the perpetrators coming out that, oh, I've done this. It's for me a positive sign. Like the one who shot the aid worker in Eastern Equatoria. He came and spoke out. He said, I did it. I killed that woman. I killed that aid worker, because he found that his conscience was disturbed. So there's this positive trend coming out. We in the church, in the Council of Churches, are engaging communities in order to come together as South Sudanese. We engage communities, we call the communities to dialogue, not within interclans, but community conversation, bringing them together so they recognize that they are South Sudanese. This trend down the line in this 10th anniversary is already there. And we are enhancing on this. We don't want to let this chance go. We are going to the spirit of moonlit, that people dialogue, the Nuer and the Jeng dialogue together to cut the leadership who had failed that time to give them the services. Today, in spite of no services, but they are already, although their implementation is slow, or the agreement is slow, they have realized that they need to work together as a team, whether in the sense of reconciliation, whether in the sense of forgiving. They need to work together as a team, not as parties. This is being seen in them. You see Riek Machar driving to President Kiir's office, President calling Riek Machar, please come, let us discuss this. And just this morning, I heard they are talking of graduating the army, invite army already, said it's already long down the line. So this spirit is already in them. They have felt that 10 years, what have they done? What went wrong? And they're looking now that no, we need to think positive, we need to look positive, we need to change the direction of the country. They're investing in roads. Then the Japanese have come in, friends, international friends have come in. Japanese have come in to invest in the water system, in the bridge system. United States are coming in, and other European Union is coming in to support the efforts of these guys. And these are positive trends. And I've discovered that they have already raised their hands up. They need support. They need to be directed. They need to be helped. And with this, if they reconcile, as we keep reminding them, even when the Pope kissed their feet, I got a phone from Riek Machar yesterday. He said, Father, I realize that I feel I'm a curse, but I need to remind you that the Pope's kissing my feet has reminded me today that I need to work together with my brother Riek Machar 10 years down the line. War will not take them nowhere. Fighting will take them nowhere. So we need to give hope for the people of South Sudan. We need to give service to the people of South Sudan. This is what is coming from their mouth. And I believe and trust that South Sudan is going to change after 10 years. Women have taken up their role. The youth, desperate as they are, we are engaging them not to look at employment with the government or with other things. This self-employment, self-doing things, they need to take that into realm. And then the perpetrators have started realizing the issue of human rights, the issue of justice. Perpetrators have realized it already. So as they realize it, it's positive. So we need to invest and let the perpetrators and those who are victims to feel that they are being responded to. Ingo?
Thank you, Father. Irene, again, really brief, that we have enough time. Could you give us like a really, really short word about how is South Sudan situated in the region in the moment and for the next couple of years, because so much is getting on in the neighboring countries, and of course it's affecting South Sudan as well.
This is, you realize, an almost impossible task. Being brief for such an issue, it's almost impossible. And also speak of the coming years, I think that's even, apart, jokes apart, even more impossible. Because to be very honest and frank with you and with the audience, I don't think anyone has a sense of how the region will look like in a few months, let alone in a few years. So what we are seeing is a bit of, I think, a seismic change, or at least a seismic challenge to the stabilities of some of the countries. And in this moment, in this specific moment, to Ethiopia in particular, but we saw the same happening in Sudan over the last few years, with a transition that is still on a good trajectory, but fragile, complicated, which may or may not succeed. Obviously, we all hope it will succeed, and it was a great news yesterday when Sudan reached the decision point on under the program for the high indebted countries, because that means that they will start, a process for the debt forgiveness, which is great, but it's challenging. It's a very complicated transition with many actors, still very fragile, and so on. So yes, the region is fluid, to say the least, and this, in any case, affects South Sudan. First and foremost, because simply, geographically, Sudan is there. It borders Sudan. South Sudan is there. Borders Sudan. It borders Ethiopia. Borders Kenya and Uganda. Uganda went through elections and came out relatively okay, but the president, without wishing him bad, obviously, wishing him a very long life, but he's getting older and older. So at a certain point, a degree of transition may happen there as well. Kenya will have elections next year, and they are already preparing. So we have all sorts of challenges across the region. South Sudan is there. It borders with all this country. On the other side, it borders with Central African Republic, which luckily is not part of our mandate as a special representative team for the Horn of Africa, but obviously is part of this system of unstable countries across this part of Africa. And so it can be easily affected. I think in this moment, the two probably more important things to watch are the bilateral relation with Khartoum, which certainly is far better than it used to be. But there is the perception among the international community that some of the main actors in the Sudan's transition may also use their friendship and their links into Juba for their own achievements and their own goals in Khartoum. So, depending on how things continue and progress in Khartoum, there may or may not be consequences and impacts in Juba as well. The other element that I think I would like to stress is that the peace agreement is an IGAD peace agreement, as we said earlier. And in the most difficult moments of the process, from the very beginning, from when in 2013, the violence started on 15 December, throughout, February 2020, when finally the transition started and the presidency was sworn in, all these moments, the difficult topical moments, happened because the region put pressure on the leadership, sorry. Mm-hmm. In this moment, I don't see the region coming together to do something like that, because the challenges, domestic, but also interstate challenges across the region are such that, frankly, I don't see the heads of state coming together to discuss and put pressure on the leaderships of South Sudan. So the main tool that we have used for years to try to push the process forward in the most difficult moments, I'm afraid is not there, is not available, at least for the time being, and we don't know exactly when it may be available again. And I stop here.
Right. Last but certainly not least, Ambassador Page, from the international perspective, and keeping in mind that we have a new US administration that might be more engaged in Africa, what needs to happen from the international perspective to get South Sudan back on a recovery course?
Well, I will try to be brief, but I would say that first and foremost, the people of South Sudan have to be engaged, and it's not something that can be, carved out for the international community. I think, as Irene has just said, the region is very divided with lots of stuff going on in these individual countries, and a lot of African countries also are not necessarily all that interested in the US's involvement. But I I believe that the work that is going on by sort of the Council of Churches and others at the local level on reconciliation, but also on not just reconciliation and healing, but some local justice measures. I think that that's really important, and the international community can support that, not by just putting pressure on the establishment of the hybrid court, but people want justice. It doesn't have to be in the form of the high level. It's important, it's there, it's in the agreement, but I would say that those are some of the areas that we can support. It's a shame that Edmund Haqqani couldn't join us, but the work that he's doing, the work that the churches are doing, and local actors, you know, that the unsung heroes trying to make a difference on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, I would say also Sant'Egidio, which is also trying to look at some of the underlying issues, but that is perhaps for a slightly a different time. But I'll stop there because I'm sure that it'll dovetail with the questions of the audience.
Thank you very much to all of you. I now would like to open up, and yeah, as you rightly said, I would love to focus more like on the civil society actors, but yeah, we didn't had Edmund here, so in this case we had a stronger focus in this area. So you can, as some of you already did, ask questions in this chat, but also we have the possibility to bring you into the discussion. My colleague could assist you and bring you into this discussion. So you can think about it. And where we have the first one or two hands, before that I will go to one question from Tizian Tadesse. He asked, it's a long question, if someone of you could elaborate a little bit more again on the
civil society
on the civil society and how they can support the process in the moment.
Yeah. Can I give some answer there?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, that question from Sion Tadesse in Addis Ababa, that's the role of civil society actors in the past 10 years in South Sudan. As I speak, the civil society actors have been very influential in the peace negotiation, in the dissemination of the peace. And as I speak, they're like the watchdogs of the implementation of the agreement. Although they have been going through challenging times, their space have been squeezed at times, and they couldn't act, even like our friend Edmund Haqqani. They have to change, they don't carry phones. They have to change residence here and there just so that the security don't get on them. However, they never gave up. They went through the hard times, and today the recognized government are recognizing the role being played by the civil society actors. So the space is getting open now as I speak. So they have been very influential down the line the last 10 years in difficult situations, in challenging situations. I want to appreciate the role of the civil society actors, the Edmund Haqqanis, the Rafan Muhandis, and all other women, the Mary Ajit and others. There are very many of that. They have been very influential in disseminating the peace and even challenging the authority in regard to implementation. This I don't rule out. And then the second question, the chat box, was addressed to us South Sudanese panelists regarding, it says, if the current leadership has failed the people of South Sudan, what are the chances that a different and more able group of people will take over the leadership? Well, I just can answer simply like this. Chances are only through peace implementation that will lead to the election, free elections. But of course, with a new constitution in the country. Now our constitution is, the president rules by decrees, appointing this, removing that. In the last 10 years, it has been all decrees. So the way out, the chance is only through the implementation of the revitalized peace that will lead the people of South Sudan to free elections in the new constitution. Ingo?
Thank you. We have one guest with us, Sebastian Gräfe. Mr. Gräfe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Ask your question, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the discussion. I really enjoyed it. And my question is actually posed to the South Sudanese guests. As some of you already raised the issue of civil society, the need for another point is that the government actually needs to provide basic services. But I'm more interested in the area of human rights, and one of you mentioned that just in the last comment. Could you shed a little bit light on the current state of freedom of expression? I know that throughout the last decade there was an up and down with regard to freedom of expression. Journalists got imprisoned and faced penalties or even other consequences. I just wonder how the situation is right now with regard to freedom of expression in South Sudan. Thank you very much.
So, Professor Biel, do you want to answer?
I have a number of, I don't know whether you want me to answer that question or that already, I think 3 questions here we have not, we were not answered. One is about the constitution making. And the other one is about inclusive peace agreement. So let me start first with the first question, our expectation about constitution making. Yes, of course, the idea is a good idea. There's no country that can run without a constitution. But currently, I don't believe that at the current situation, that the constitution making is important, because first, you have to, when you have a constitution, a draft of constitution, people have to move freely, that you may think about having a referendum on the constitution itself. The country is fragmented. I don't believe that that's the right time now actually to work on the constitution. We must have first a peaceful environment. You know, must have a permanent peace. Then you could actually now, you know, because that environment of peace will actually, people will not think that they are doing constitution over this. I remember when we have the interim constitution of South Sudan, 2005, you know what the discussion we had. And the former Minister of Justice, which was done by other people giving the presidency a lot of power, you know, we admit at the end of the day before he died. So actually, we don't want to make a constitution for people who are now in power or for anybody. This has to be a permanent constitution that must be respected by everybody, president or everybody. So it's not the time for decision making now, in my view. Secondly, I want to answer the issue of inclusive peace agreement. I think you have seen the government has been engaging what you call the other opposition group that has not been a part of the 2008 agreement. And I think they have been engaging them a lot. This is very important because for us to have a peace, it is necessary that everybody come on board. You know, we don't want to have a rebel group here and there destabilizing the country. We are already a destabilized country. So it is very important, and I appreciate the effort of the government that they are trying their best to ensure that those whole-out group come in and be a part of the development of this country so that we actually close the chapter of crisis and all this and focus on development. Now, the last question that the participant asked is about the freedom of expression. You know, when you are in in a country of crisis like that, definitely it's not easy, because even whatever you said, whether it's the right things, definitely the other side will misunderstood it, is misinterpreted. So I always heard from civil society group that there is a challenge of expression of you know, and there are a lot of complications on this. So it's a question of debate, you know, because in other side people said, yeah, you can talk freely, and we are talking, but other side people said. So this is something that I cannot give a definite answer, but a lot of publication on this has been written. So that is a question of debate. The last one which I want to say something is about the question raised by Ambassador Shankar about whether the current leadership has failed the people of South Sudan. I think it has been said several times by the government representative, because when you have this kind of situation, you have to take responsibility as a leader, you know. And I think a lot has been said about this, that the SPLM as a party has failed the people of South Sudan. Also, it has liberated them, but it has, at the same time, the other side of the coin has actually failed the people. Yes, this is what I can say on this. Thank you.
Maybe I could just add one quick comment on the freedom of speech. Obviously, I'm not sitting in South Sudan like my fellow panelists are, but I would just say that from observations from afar and from commentary from my colleagues and friends who are in South Sudan, the situation is really pretty bad in terms of freedom of speech. And I don't see a lot of progress being made in that regard. And, you know, unless things change and people are willing to continue to speak up and take the risks that they are doing, not much is going to change, because the power is not in the hands of the people. And so I think even saying that the government, you know, needs to provide services, yes, but we've been saying that. I mean, everyone, the people of South Sudan have been saying that for years. It doesn't take anyone from outside to say that. But what will actually make them do the things that they need to do? And that's where I see the problem. And that leads to perhaps the question that was the last question maybe in the chat. And I think that the only way for some of that to happen is for the population to unite, to reconcile, and to have a broader base of people who can challenge the government. And that means by being South Sudanese first and foremost, as Father has said, you know, instead of being so much into my community and then the split of my community from this part of my community, but really defining what it means to be South Sudanese.
Next question is from Marina Peter from Brot für die Welt.
Thank you very much. It's already very late. Mine is more a comment than a question, in fact. And I'm happy to see some of my old friends again. Thank you for your contributions. Ambassador Page, you already started in the beginning by saying international community also made a lot of mistakes by not monitoring the first phase and so on and so on. And in the end, you said now we have to focus on the local level. I could not agree more. And actually, this is what we have been saying basically for the last 20 years already. And my question now is, how can we ensure that this time it will work differently? Because to me, all of us, and I speak about myself as well, are part and parcel of the disaster in South Sudan. Of course, the first responsibility lies with the government and with the warring parties and whatsoever. But these high expectations, knowing that these people are weak, that they are coming with a military mind and all that, and pouring a lot of money into that very country, It was not only oil money which went into dark channels, but it was a lot of international money. International NGOs, they knew better. They did not give the local NGOs a chance, a real chance, but they started implementing themselves. They were ruling the country like they did in the past during the war. And this goes on until today. And I think there is a big problem with our system of providing people really with the necessary money, with the necessary trust, so that they really can implement on the ground. SSCC is always struggling to raise the money for their big program of implementation. All NGOs on the ground are struggling. And there are, as Father Oyet and Melha and all the others were saying, there are so great people. It will take a long time, but we have to evaluate what did we also contribute to this mess, and what do we need to change now, so that the wonderful people of South Sudan really have a chance. So it was not a question, but a comment, but thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, Ingo, can I say something? Hello?
Yeah, sure, but we still have two other participants. So again, briefly, please.
Yes, can I say something?
Sure.
Yes, I think, Marina, I think you are absolutely right, because actually I'm doing a lot of work with local NGOs in South Sudan, and they have actually been complaining that they are not given the opportunity. And you are absolutely right. It's something that you need to empower the local NGOs, because they are very closer to the community. It's a part of a development. I just want to say, yes, this is really a great challenge that almost our NGOs are facing here in South Sudan. And I think there is a need for international community to review their action and their activities to ensure that the local NGOs, have a bigger role as a part of peace, as a part of development. Thank you very much.
Next question is from Peter Schumann.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm traveling. Thank you very much. My question is relates to the United Nations. As some of you may know or may remember, I spent a lot of time with UNMISS and UNMISS with 1S and 2S and UNAMID. So I spent a lot of time with the UN in Sudan. And my question is related to an event which actually takes place today. In Darfur, the mission has closed down all its operational facilities and handed most of them over to the government. Do you really see a future role of UNMISS in South Sudan, looking at the past performance of this very elaborate, very complex, very complicated operation? Is there really a future for this type of operations in a situation as in South Sudan? Or is it really time to honestly question, rethink this kind of an intervention? In my view, we're seeing more problems arising from the mission than the mission really contributes to a solution. I know that this also goes back into the UN Security Council. What is the role of the UN Security, or what has been the role of the Security Council in South Sudan to stabilize the country, to stabilize the region? I think the question goes to all panelists. Would really love to see.
About it to Irene Panozzo.
And my special greetings, of course, go to Susan Page.
Thank you, Ingo. You are giving me all the most difficult questions. Anyway, I think it depends what future for UNMISS means in this case, in the sense that UNMISS had a mandate for state building that was obviously changed after the civil war started, and it hasn't had a component of state building in its mandate for several years. Now, with the last renewal of the mandate, some elements concerning the implementation of the peace agreement, the preparation for elections, the preparation for the constitution-making process have been reinserted. But basically, after the war started in late 2013, the mandate has been mostly about protection of civilians. Now, certainly there have been problems, we cannot deny that. And I work for the EU, not for the UN, so it's not my job to defend them. But at the same time, let's be honest, if the gates of UMIS in Tomping on the morning of the 14th of December had not been opened, many more people would have been killed in those days in Juba, and probably elsewhere in the country, in Bentiu, in Malakal, and so on. There has been a lot of debate about the transformation, the handing over of the protection of civilian sites to the government and letting them become IDPs camps instead of protection of civilian camps over the last year, basically. But for example, Malakal is still a protection of civilian camp precisely because the situation in Malakal is so fragile that nobody would dare handing over the security of that camp to the government. So, and the reasoning behind the transformation of the POCs in IDP camps was to free peacekeepers, to have them more mobile and go out in how are they called, forward operating missions? So in bases, so be deployed where it's needed in the different places. It's very difficult, to really assess in a precise way what would have happened to South Sudan without the UMIS over these last few years. How many more people would have died? More, less? I think it's impossible to assess, but to be honest, I think the peacekeepers have done part, at least part. Probably they could have done better, yes. Obviously, every mission can do better all the time, but I think there is still the need. I don't see a South Sudan without a peacekeeping mission, to be honest. But this is just me. Over.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you, to all the panelists and all the questions from the audience, because 90 minutes are up in overtime. So let me say two things. First, in the chat, we have a form for feedback, and this is also always really important for us. And then second, I hand over to David Schwake for some closing remarks. Thank you. You're muted.
Mute.
You don't hear me. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Ingo. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I think I can speak on behalf of all of us. This was a fascinating and very, very interesting session, and I want to thank all our panelists for being here and for their contributions. Susan Page, it was great to see you again and benefit from your wisdom and insights. Same for you, Irene, of course, and it was great to get some first-hand knowledge from people on the ground, and I want to stress the contributions by our two South Sudanese panelists, Professor Biel and Father Oyet. The account that you gave us, of course, was very sad, and even though there were some, let's say, glimmers of hope. Let me conclude by assuring you, in particular our South Sudanese friends, that South Sudan has not been forgotten. I think many people in Germany and elsewhere in the US, for instance, care about South Sudan, and we will continue to look and follow very closely at what is going on in South Sudan. I think you're not forgotten, and please let your friends know. Let me conclude by setting the record straight on one tiny detail. We are the German Africa Foundation. We are fully independent from the German Foreign Office, but funded by the Foreign Office, or through the Foreign Office by Parliament. This was our last event before the summer break. We will be back sometime in September, and I hope that I see you all then back in September. Thank you very much again, and all the best. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the German Africa Foundation.
Thank you.
Thank
David.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Nico.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.